This is Hokkaido milk bread. I know, you've probably heard a lot about bread recently, but this bread is special. It's light and feathery, and it's kind of like eating a cloud. It's also the bread in Japan. It's so important that its name literally translates to food bread in Japanese. Hi guys, I'm Alexi. I'm a Bright Trip contributor, and today I'm going to teach you about Hokkaido milk bread as we try to make it. So Hokkaido milk bread is really important in Japan specifically, but also throughout Asia. It's the staple bread throughout the continent, and it's even the source of one of Japan's other famous exports. The heels of the loaves are actually used to make panko breadcrumbs. So Hokkaido milk bread is made up of 8 things: flour, sugar, salt, yeast, eggs, butter, milk, and sweetened condensed milk. Check out the episode description for the full recipe if you want to follow along. 2 things really make Hokkaido milk bread special: Hokkaido milk and shengjong. Shengjong is a Chinese cooking technique where you pre-cook a little bit of the flour into a paste. This creates a gel that locks in a lot of the moisture so it can't evaporate. What you're left with is a bread that contains a lot of moisture and stays fresh for a way longer time without the use of preservatives. Okay, we will let the shengjong cool while we start mixing up our other ingredients. So we're going to mix together our dry ingredients first, starting with the flour, sugar, yeast, and salts. So we'll go ahead and get those combined. The other key ingredient is Hokkaido milk. And Hokkaido milk is a specialty that you can really only get in Japan. It's milk from the Hokkaido region that's just exceptionally good. It's thick and creamy and has this slight sweetness that you don't normally see in milks. So I live in Atlanta and I definitely cannot get Hokkaido milk here, unfortunately. So what I'm gonna do is combine this normal, boring supermarket milk with a little bit of sweetened condensed milk to get some of that creamy richness that you get in Hokkaido milk, along with a touch of the sweetness. So we're gonna combine this and put it in with our dry ingredients, and then we're also gonna add 1 beaten egg as well as our starter, and we'll get that all mixed up. So at this point, you might be understandably a little bit confused because milk and bread are just not ingredients that we typically associate with Japanese cuisine at all. So how did these 2 things become popular, and how did milk bread become the essential staple that we see in Japanese and Pan-Asian cuisine today? So while we mix this, we're going to take a little trip back in time to answer that question. Through most of Japanese history, milk and bread were exceptionally rare. Milk was really only drank for medicinal purposes and not really as a food source. Bread, on the other hand, was first brought to Japan in the 1500s by Dutch and Portuguese missionaries. After it was introduced, bread didn't really take off. It was mainly only eaten at Christian religious events. So when Christianity was banned in Japan in the 1600s, bread went with it. Now that we've got our dough a little bit together, we're gonna add in some butter to finish off the dough, and then we're gonna turn it out onto a floured work surface so we can knead it for about 10 minutes. Both foods didn't start to take off in Japan until the mid-19th century during the Meiji era. The Meiji era was this time of profound change in Japanese society. It went from being this closed, highly regulated society where small lords ruled over smaller collections of farmers in the countryside, and that was really the main system of government, until the Meiji era, where they modernized it very quickly to make it this really open, democratic society that had a lot of connections with the international world. The Japanese government during the Meiji era changed everything, including the food. They actually instituted a nutritional strategy to use for school children and to recommend to families. And a big part of that nutritional strategy was milk. During this period, the Japanese government established a bunch of national dairies throughout the country to make milk production more widespread, and they even publicized in the newspaper that Emperor Meiji drank milk twice a day to encourage citizens to follow suit. This is also when milk bread is thought to have been invented specifically. Bread during this era was still really considered a snack food, so that's why you see breads that are more sweet in Japan as opposed to Western breads, which tend to be more savory and eaten as a staple. In the 1920s, Hokkaido milk was born. Hokkaido is the northernmost island of Japan, and in the 20s, it was really the last frontier. Settlers started moving in, and they realized that the area was perfectly suited for dairy farms. It has a much cooler, foggy climate with really short summers. It's also the least densely populated area of Japan, so there's lots of space for cow farms. Once the government realized that Hokkaido was perfectly suited for milk production, they heavily subsidized the industry. They paid for the construction of farms, for farmers to buy cows, and they actually set up rules allowing for the formation of milk cooperatives for the marketing and sales of milk throughout the country. Because of these incentives and because of the climate, dairy started popping up throughout Hokkaido, and Hokkaido was cemented as the primary dairy producing region in Japan. The next big moment for milk and bread in Japan was in the aftermath of World War II. Rice, which is the staple in Japanese cuisine, was really expensive and was rationed at the time. Meanwhile, US occupying forces were importing wheat, yeast, and powdered milk. These ingredients were incorporated into the school lunch system called kaiyushoku in order to combat post-war food scarcity. Because of this, milk became a food staple for Japanese school children. In the 1950s, bread actually began replacing rice as a side for soups and fried cutlets. Meanwhile, milk was so ubiquitous that Japanese neighborhoods had their own milkmen. Both products only gained more popularity from here. In the 1970s, Japanese convenience stores, called konbinis, started carrying sandwiches, which really cemented bread as a staple of Japanese cuisine. Milk was a really popular seasonal drink, so it was actually drank in the summer, kind of like ice cream. In 2011, Japanese households actually spent more money on bread than on rice for the first time in history, and bakeries across Japan gained prominence, especially Kyoto, which is now known for its bakeries. Hokkaido milk is used to make most desserts in Japan today, along with tofu, ice cream, makeup, and of course, Hokkaido milk tea, which is Japan's answer to Taiwanese bubble tea. At one point, they even created beer milk in Japan.
Oh, this isn't that beer. I just think it's hilarious that Harrison Ford did a Japanese beer commercial in the 90s. It's very this.
Ichiban.
Hokkaido milk bread was at the center of it all as the bread in Japanese cuisine. It earned a place in international bakeries like the Korean Paris baguette and the Chinese fei da. Now that we've kneaded our dough for about 10 minutes and it's come together in this nice round ball, we're going to rest it in a lightly oiled bowl covered in a towel for about 1 hour or until it's doubled in size.
1 hour later.
So as you can see here, we've got our nice risen dough, and the next step is going to be for us to cut it into 4 pieces and to roll it out. So Hokkaido milk bread actually comes in 2 different styles. It can be in a rectangular shape called kakushoku, or it can be in a rounded domed loaf called yamagata shokuban. I cut it in thirds. Aww. It might be a little uneven, but it'll still be delicious. So now that we have our 4 pieces, we're gonna go ahead and start rolling them out.
Kakushoku, the rectangle loaf, you need a special loaf pan to make that.
So we're gonna be making the rounded version today, which just uses a regular loaf pan. We're gonna go ahead and roll each of the 4 pieces out until it's about the size of our loaf pan. Okay, this looks about the right size. So next you're gonna take the 2 long sides and fold them in about 1 inch, like this on each side, so you have more of a standard shape. Okay, and then we're gonna take the short end and we're gonna roll it up onto itself so we get this cute little pudgy roll. Go ahead and place that into your pan. Now at this point, you're gonna have your 4 little bread babies all squished together in your pan. We're gonna let this rise for another 45 minutes so it can get nice and fluffy. And in the meantime, preheat your oven to 350 degrees. We're gonna brush them with an egg wash so they get that characteristic bakery glisten. Then we're gonna bake them for about 30 to 40 minutes until golden brown. When you take it out, you'll have the softest bread in the world. You can thank me in the comments. So there you have it. That is how Hokkaido milk bread became a Japanese staple and an international cult classic. We can thank an emperor who tried to make milk happen, a collective of socialist cows laboring together on a milk cooperative, and an international war that caused global trauma and devastation. Let's wrap it up with some B-roll. If you want to learn more about Japan, you should definitely check out the Tokyo Demystified course on Bright Trip. It covers a ton of topics, including ramen, how to do the city with kids, and a little bit of the history of this fascinating and truly massive city. There is a ton of information in this course, so check it out at this link. You can also find the link in the description for more information. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you made Hokkaido milk bread, drop a comment to let me know how it went, and make sure to subscribe for future videos like this.
Dewa mata ne!